I've always wanted to have this conversation about humor and sadness and the weird braid that they create in our hearts and how we navigate this wild, like, laugh till you cry, cry till you laugh, like that whole just crazy being a human thing offers us. And I had this great conversation with a therapist friend who's in my writing class, Julie Mermelstein, and she's just everything when it comes to understanding this full spectrum of being human. She's just an advocate for it, and she teaches, and she's an educator, and she's someone who kind of sits right inside the mess of addiction and is not afraid of just understanding what we need to do, how we need to just crawl on the ground and writhe in our experiences, because she has the talent to lift us up and to make us feel better. And that's what great therapists do. So today I wanted to spark a conversation with Julie to really dig into, like, what happens with our hearts and our heads and our bodies when we are in terrible trauma, and where does humor fit into that? And the reason why she is so appropriate to talk about this is because she was a stand-up comic, and she was a trained stand-up comic. She worked with the Groundlings, and she has that background of serious sport, of being funny. And then at some point in her life, she decided, you know what, I'm ready to take this to the next place, which is deep human relationship place, where you sit with somebody in their pain and you don't have any irreverence, but you know when humor is going to lift the situation and bring perspective. And that's what I want to talk about today. So I think a lot of us in this community on Swell have navigated the depths of emotion. We have a really big mental wellness community here. And I'm excited to infuse that community with, like, the happy pill, and talk about jokes and laughter and goofiness and silliness as it relates to our ability to have some resilience around something that really sucks, like pain and loss and trauma. And you got to have a light touch sometimes, because you don't want to hurt somebody. You don't want to say something wrong. You don't want to trigger someone not feeling safe with you. And that's all the stuff that Julie does. So we're going to just get into it. Julie, thank you for being willing to just be here and go with this. And I'm going to keep this conversation open so people can come in. And no matter what your background is, anybody listening, we are ready to have this conversation with you. So I'll kick it off. Julie, I want to go to the deep end of this for a second, which is when does humor obfuscate someone being honest because they're couching it with trying to be funny and kind of deflect? And are you a really good reader of that? And when that happens, how do you navigate that? Because I think a lot of us have a lot of layers, and one of them is like, I'm going to just kind of be a funny, happy person, and I'm not going to get to the meat of the issue with you. And as a therapist, that's your job. You got to peel away all that stuff and get us to be honest. When you see that happening, when someone's deflecting with their humor, how do you play with that and then go in? And is that something that is part of the work you do, where you sort of can intuit that someone's kind of staying on that surface because it's where they're comfortable?
Hello, Deborah and the Swell community. Thanks so much for having me and for that wonderful intro. I'm really happy to be here and excited to talk about this topic. It's very near and dear to my heart and head and life experience. Just kind of dive in and start with your first question. Just giving a little bit of background for my training. I was a trained actor and comic from early on. I went to the High School of Performing Arts in New York and Emerson College in Boston and studied theater at both. And then joined a comedy group at Emerson, and then went on to do a lot of improv, studied with the Groundlings, was a stand-up comic, and wrote all my own material mostly. So from the very beginning, like starting at like age 12 or 13, even being in the star of my school play in junior high, I was always fascinated and wanting to like observe human behavior. I was just fascinated by people in general and human behavior. And it's a huge part of being an actor. and a huge part of being a therapist. So people often ask me, like, was it a big jump for you to go from being a comic to a therapist? And yes, because I'm not performing as a therapist. I'm not translating my work into a performance. Very much myself, with obviously the appropriate boundaries as a therapist. But I am observing. That's all I do, really, is listen, observe, and reflect back. So that's something I've been doing a long time and have kind of an intuitive ability to know when, where, how to bring in some humor. And I look at it kind of like conducting an orchestra or choreographing a dance, where you just have to find the right spot and the right opening to bring humor in. And obviously with somebody who's seeking help from a therapist for pain or trauma or depression or anxiety or hard stuff that's not funny, that's a very careful, delicate balance you have to find. But I find that if I can find that opening, once you build rapport, once you've built the trust, and I can just get in there with a little humor sometimes, my clients really like it. I think they get to see a glimpse of me in a different way that's very human. They feel a little bit of relief, a little respite from the intensity, and it helps them to see that, you know, the sort of flow of how their nervous system, I work a lot with trauma in the nervous system, how their nervous system could just get a little break, even if it's for 3 minutes of a good laugh. And we'll go back to it. You know, it's a yin, a yang, an up, a down. You know, it doesn't always have to be this flat line of intensity. We can take a little moment, have a laugh, get back to it. And they feel very seen and very heard, I think, when I can find that right place to get the humor in there. And I'm really happy to say it's really never backfired on me, because I've been observing them and learning about them and learning their rhythm and getting a better idea of when I could get that in there. And they feel really seen, and I think it makes them feel even safer. And the other thing I wanted to add to answer your question is that when I see that it's a deflection, like when people use humor to deflect and hide behind the humor and not deal with the hard stuff, one of the things you're trained to do is to help them see that their affect isn't congruent with what's going on. So if they're laughing or making jokes or, you know, candy coating something that really needs deeper attention and thought, I reflect back to them that the affect is not congruent. Wow, you just shared about, you know, your grandmother dying and you're laughing, or you seem very nervous, or you're giggling. It's not congruent with what you're talking about. Let's look at that. You know, do you see that? Can you feel that? Which is very different than me infusing some humor at a moment where I think it might help or might be appropriate.
Wow, that's so interesting. You're really parsing out the two things so well for me. So, you know, infusing your own humor is one whole bucket of conversation, but the other one is, to the point that you answered, you know, you have that skill to really relax somebody into being at the core of who they are, which is so important. That leads me to sort of a curiosity I've always had about time. Not so much when the buzzer rings in an hour. We know that sucks, and sometimes it's abrupt and people feel really awkward because they're in the middle of a sniffle or a thought or a feeling, and it's like, oh, I don't want to go. Or they're looking at their watch and half through the session they want to get back in their car. You know, there's all sorts of things with time and things opening up, and, you know. But in your experience, which is so vast and over a few decades now, I'm sure you have a sense of maybe taking a general stab at this with regard to the healing of deep pain and accepting that it's a process and not like a door you open and close. Over the time that people heal, do you feel like there's a time when ending therapy is a good thing? And do you have to introduce that yourself, or does somebody do that for you? Tell me the combos you've been experiencing over time. Like, when is it okay to stop therapy? And asking for a friend. No, seriously, I haven't been in therapy in God, probably close to 25 years now. But I remember back in the day when I really, really needed navigation and needed to go to therapy, I was always like wondering, is it the right time? And it was different moments. But thank you for navigating this with us, because I know people wonder. And how do you handle it?
Another great question, and this is somewhere where I can totally use humor to partially answer. I have it in my paperwork, and I think lots of if you ask 10 therapists this question, you might get 10 different answers. But in my paperwork and in my philosophy belief is that the client will kind of dictate when it's time to end. Short of, the therapist moving, retiring, being sick, some life tragedy or challenge, or you're a brief therapist, short-term therapy, brief therapy, you work in a treatment program, that there's a time stamp on it. Short of that, it's really, in my view, it's up to the client. And I have 3 clients who I've seen probably over 10 years now who call themselves lifers. One of them coined that term. Like I will always revisit with people, like, how you doing? How are we doing? Do you want to revisit goals? Some people who stay over 10 years, the whole thing changes, the whole relationship changes, the whole format changes. But one time I asked I think my longest term client, just want you to know, you're welcome to stay as long as you want, but it's okay to go. I know it would be hard and weird, but, I don't want people to ever think or feel or be too dependent on the therapy. My hope and goal is that, I help you to fly out of the nest and, experience life how you need to experience life with or without me. But I think the dependence factor is a big conversation. Maybe that's the next question. What's healthy, what's not healthy. But one time when I asked that client, she goes, "Oh, I'm a lifer. So just know that I'm a lifer." And I'm like, okay. So then I brought that to my second longest client, and I had that conversation with her, and I said, so I asked my other client this, who's been with me as long as you, and she said she's a lifer, and this client goes, "Yep, me too. I'm a lifer." And we still laugh about it, when I check in with them and how we doing? They're both still lifers. So some are in it for life, I guess till death do us part, or short of other things that might happen. And some are, you've heard that expression, reason, season, or a lifetime. So a lot of people come here for a reason. And I just did some work with a doctor who, in very much her doctor training and her doctor mindset, was here's the diagnosis, what's the treatment, and boom, we're done. Because that's how she works. That's how she lives. And although I may have differing opinions about what she needed and for how long, that was her goal. We reached it, done. I think it was about 3 or 4 months. Then I've got the lifers. Then I got everything in between, which are people who do come in for a reason, but they stay for many seasons. And because they build the rapport, because they explored things about themselves they didn't expect to explore, they do form an attachment. They do feel like I'm part of their self-care routine, like going to the gym. And they just factor that in. And I think that's really healthy. And I think there's been too much pathology about how long you should be in therapy or not. Are you too attached to your therapist? Or as one of my colleagues once said, which was very helpful when I was sort of questioning this topic and are my clients staying too long? She said, sometimes people need a friend, a friendly companion, a friendly visitor, and they're willing to pay for that. And they just need somebody in their life that they can download to and vent to that is different than a friend. And it may feel like a friend, but it's a friend obviously with boundaries, very, you know, clear therapeutic boundaries. But everybody's therapy goals are different. And then, you know, I don't have time, I'm about to run out, but then there's the ones who drop off, MIA, ghost, and disappear because they can't say goodbye. And that could be your next question.
I'm laughing because you just brought up what I was thinking about this whole time, which was the concept of boundaries. And you and I had mentioned that around, because I'm writing a book about boundaries and I'm really fascinated by boundaries. The humor, the fear, the scary stuff, and the stuff that's, you know, titillating even with boundaries. And I do think it's beautiful that there's so many different varieties of why someone goes to therapy. And I do think it's beautiful when a therapist is a human being and can actually process with us here on Swell about, you know, what it feels like to be in a room with someone for 10 years and what's that like, and what questions come to mind for you. We all know the taboo of any therapy is that people transfer feelings onto the therapist and people fall in love and it's messy and horrible and it never is okay. And I know there's great laws about that. But there's also great realities about, you know, you have to hold your emotions to yourself if something is in fact growing, and that's all. We don't need to go there. But I do have a two-parter here. The first part is anecdotal, and if you'll just make me laugh if you can, which is, was there ever a situation in a session where you had to hold in your laughter so hard because it wasn't okay to laugh, but you were literally peeing in your pants or not literally, but you were almost peeing in your pants because you're so oh my God, that's so funny. The person is weird or funny, but you cannot laugh because that's wrong. Can you tell me a story about that? And then with another reply, if you want, can you talk about the establishment of boundaries with a boundaryless client? And I don't know how I want to qualify that question, what's a boundaryless client, but I'm sure you could help us with that. So how do you establish boundaries with someone who clearly walks in with no boundaries?
So many stories, so many stories of when I wanted to laugh and I couldn't, and it wasn't appropriate. That happens a lot. And I'm a very, by nature, very sarcastic person, and then, you know, I have to watch that sometimes, how that lands. You know, with my friends, usually they know me well, and they know that's my flavor of humor, and they get it. And you know, I don't try to be mean or harsh, but sarcasm has its place, and I have to be careful with that at work, with clients. Sometimes, like I was saying earlier, if I time it right and it's the right situation and the right person, it can really be effective. And other times it's not appropriate or effective at all. And that would be probably when I'm what's going on here? Whether it's something somebody said, it's something they're wearing, the time when a client had no underwear on in the middle of the summer with a dress on, became basic instinct therapy, very uncomfortable. And maybe the more sarcastic comic part of me would want to be what the fuck? Where are your underwear? I sit across from you and I'm wildly uncomfortable. Thanks for that story. You know, I wouldn't say that. And then to jump to your next topic, your next question, in that situation, I let that one slide because it was once, but let's say that had gone on more than once. That would be somewhat of a boundaryless situation where I would have to do some carefrontation. I like to call it carefrontation. So people who are a little loosey-goosey with the boundaries, a lot of in my intake paperwork, I have a whole page about what the therapeutic relationship is about, you know, and what it includes and what it doesn't include. And, you know, the average person knows that sex and anything outside the office is no-go. You know, we're not going to be friends. We're not going to be going to coffee. We're not going to be texting or talking on the phone or... You know, they got the basics on that. But sometimes some people do want to hug. And I do hug some clients, and some clients it's not appropriate to hug. If she kept not wearing underwear, I would have had to gently confront her and say, if that's a choice of yours, I get it, and lots of people don't wear underwear, but if you're going to wear a dress or you're going to wear a skirt, you need to put underwear on because I'm sitting across from you and it's uncomfortable. Or if a client wanted to hug and I didn't feel it was appropriate or comfortable, I would have to say, I don't hug clients, which isn't true, I do, but not everybody. So I'd have to be discerning about who it feels right with and who it doesn't. Time and, with boundary, I haven't really had a boundaryless client in a long time. When I worked in treatment, I did all the time, because addicts and alcoholics in early recovery don't have the best boundaries. Neither do people with borderline personality disorder. That's a big part of the disorder, is not having boundaries. So again, it's back to observing, diagnosing, figuring out the situation, then figuring out, why don't they have this boundary? Is this a developmental thing? Is this a societal thing? Is it a cultural thing? We're not supposed to accept money, gifts, anything. But if somebody made me food, I would accept it, because especially if it's part of their culture. It would be insulting not to accept it. I would never accept an expensive gift, but when my mom died, clients sent me gifts and flowers and food. I accepted that because it's appropriate. But somebody once tried to tip me $600 at Hanukkah. That's not appropriate. So I'd say, oh, no, thank you. I appreciate it, but I don't take tips. So you really have to just depend on the situation and what they're doing. And people who are chronically late, people who blow off sessions, people who don't pay you on time, those are all boundary issues that you have to address. And I try to get all of that up front and then really hold to it. And that's really hard, to really hold to it. And people start slipping around with their boundaries, but it's something that I'm really adamant about these days, because then I'm the one who suffers if I don't. The other thing I wanted to add about boundaries is that, part of the therapeutic relationship is role modeling and mirroring. A lot of people have trouble with life skills in general, addicts and alcoholics especially, because, they've just been coping basically with drugs and alcohol and checking out and doing whatever they want and not really adhering to the laws of society. So part of the work with the therapist is holding the boundary, especially with anything inappropriate. I've had clients call me names, slam my door, yell, scream, throw things, not necessarily at me, but, just wildly inappropriate behavior. So part of the dance, and some of that, if we're talking about humor, is really funny. And some is really disturbing. And, if you can be really detached and which you're trained to be, and not take any of that behavior personally, and just know these people need help and they're showing you how distressed they are. But if you're going to role model for them how to be out in the world and get a job and be in a relationship, and you can't behave like that. You can't. So it starts in here, in the office. I always say what we do in here is what you're going to do out there. You practice in here and then you go do it out there. So if I hold a boundary that, I had this happen recently. I wait 15 minutes, and if I don't hear from somebody, I kind of move on to the next thing. That's also in my paperwork. So that's your time. You're paying for that time. If you don't tell me if you're sick, you're running late, you had an accident, and I don't hear from you, then I will wait 15 minutes and then I'm going to move on. Then that time isn't yours anymore. Now you're kind of wasting my time. It happens, people MIA for all sorts of reasons, but if you don't tell me what's going on, then I don't hold that time. And most therapists have that rule. So I had a client recently who didn't show up. He overslept. I don't think he contacted me for maybe 30 or 40 minutes, but I had already moved on to a call that I was on and I couldn't get off, and it was hard to get off, and I tried to reschedule with him, but he got really mad and he fired me. And he thought that that I was being, whatever. Like he wanted that last 20 minutes of the session. And I was like, I got on another call. I can't get off it now. And we need to reschedule because you were 30, 40 minutes late. But he couldn't accept that boundary. And he left therapy. So that happens sometimes, If that happened at work or he was late for an important meeting, his boss might write him up, or he might get fired or, those kinds of things happen. So we're role modeling it in here, and then hopefully they can tolerate it. But there are obviously extreme situations where they can't.
Yeah, everything seems magnified in this culture of client therapist. What we do anywhere, we do everywhere. That's that expression. How we do something one way, we do every way, blah, blah, blah. So if someone is chronically late, they're probably going to be late for your session. And that looks into this idea of people's consideration and their relationship to their own time management. It's all big hair nest, bird nest, hair tangle. What am I trying to say? Okay. I also been thinking a lot in conversing with you about this laugh till you cry till you laugh thing. Can you talk about laughter and tears with me for a second? And I'm going to just sort of feel my way into this question. So we have tears of laughter. We know those tears, they're so delicious. And then we have tears of sorrow. And we have laughter that is nervous. And we have laughter that is joyous. And we have laughter that is coming from a self-deprecating, evil place. But there's all sorts of ways human beings express. And it's really profound to think about it as we're like these mammals that have these sounds that come out of our body, these fluids that come out of our eyes. And they're all jumbled up in a lifetime. And sometimes you're in a weepy period. Sometimes you're in a giggly period. But when you're inside a therapeutic dynamic, I'm imagining that people feel very safe and they're just going to blow a gasket and go. A lot of emotions. And from your perspective, if you meet somebody that doesn't do either thing, someone that it just hasn't had the tears in a long time or hasn't had the joy in a long time and hasn't had the span of human emotion in a long time, there are those people that need to find their way out of that stuck place and discover themselves again through laughter, through tears. And that's some of the most profound transformations I'm imagining that you see when people find that and they evolve, and it's so beautiful. But it's magic too. Like it's stuff that's, I don't even know what it is to understand or to comprehend the bigness of where tears come from and where laughter comes from, and how important it is to bring those out as expressions, as catharsis. Do you believe from a therapeutic perspective that people should just laugh and cry in their therapy because then they're raw? Or do you not hold it to the highest standard that I'm holding it right now? Do you think it's just another human expression, but it's not the penultimate? Crying is everything and laughter is everything because it's so outward. Do you have a meter that you use to measure if someone, God, they need a big cry or they need a big laugh? Where does it fit into your, I don't know, your therapeutic toolkit or something?
Yeah, some good questions, Deborah. Got me thinking a lot. I think that the human range of emotions are complicated and vast. And, what I think is best or right for somebody is not a come on, come all kind of situation. I know what I know about the body and the brain and the nervous system and the way that we are wired. One of the, very famous and, referred to books about trauma is called The Body Keeps the Score. And I am a very trauma-informed therapist. There's all sorts of trauma. In the trauma world, they call it big T, little t. So lots of people have little t's and they don't think that it's trauma. A lot of people, were not role modeled to feel all their feelings, that it was okay. There's a lot of shame around the harder feelings. A lot of people didn't talk about feelings at all. There's cultural issues, gender issues about feeling feelings. So I really try to go into it with an open mind that everybody's perception of feeling feelings is not the same as mine, nor just because I'm a therapist and I'm in the business of feelings doesn't mean that everybody's going to be feeling their feelings on a deep, deep level. But what could be deep to me could be very different and to someone else to what is deep or what is cathartic. So I really try not to have an agenda or a expectation about what anybody's going to feel or how I'm going to get them there, or that they have to feel on a deep level and have the big cry or have the big laugh. But what I know about the body and the brain is that if we don't get it out at some point, there's going to be problems. And those problems manifest in all sorts of things: drugs and alcohol, depression, anxiety, anhedonia, which is like an inability to really feel joy, kind of that numb, flatlining feeling, acting out in all sorts of ways, sexually, with money, with food. So I look at it like a backed up sink, if you don't use the garbage disposal or get the stuff out of the drain into the garbage, it's going to get backed up and stuck. And that's what I see happen a lot with people, is they're just really backed up. And I try to explain to them, like I do a lot of psychoeducation in the beginning about trauma, about neural pathways, about the way in which we process emotions and store emotions, somatic stuff, health issues, the immune system. So they have a lot of information, and obviously they're coming to me because they need help and, something's not working right. But how and when and what and how much they emote is really about their comfort level. And I try to help them expand the window of tolerance. So, if having a giant meltdown cry is just wildly uncomfortable, I say sometimes to just shed a few tears in a movie, or if a song moves you, just cry. Doesn't have to be about, losing your dad or your pet, if that's just too hard and too much, or a horrible trauma. If you're watching a movie and you feel tears coming, let them come. If you want to laugh your head off at something really stupid, or anything that makes you laugh, do it. Because it's just a release. It's like a sneeze, like an orgasm, throwing up. They're all releases. So if you look at it from the perspective of releasing something in your nervous system, there's going to be room for more stuff and more ability to manage all these emotions and these wide range of emotions and getting unstuck. Also wanted to add on it, since we're talking about laughter, that a lot of people, when you're in pain or when you're going through a rough time, don't feel that laughter is accessible. But more often than not, it is. And it doesn't have to be either or. Like, in order to laugh and have a good time for an hour, or just have a good chuckle with a friend, or at a comedy show, doesn't mean that you're not in pain or that you're not going through something tough. I had to put my beloved cat Ollie to sleep a couple of months ago, and it was awful, and it still is awful, and I'm still grieving and I'm still mourning. And I've had some great laughs, in the past few months, with friends, at movies, at comedy shows. Things like, it's important to me to laugh, to give my nervous system a break, to remember that it's possible. You know, we're very resilient, complex creatures that can actually cry and laugh in the same breath, in the same hour, in the same day, week, month, year. So why not? You know, because it's sending a message to the neural pathways and you know, if you trauma resiliency, that we're gonna be okay. We're suffering, we're struggling, we're having a hard time, and when we laugh, we're sending a message to the brain, a little relief, a little respite, but also if we're trying to rebuild some neural pathways around trauma or anxiety or depression, we're sending a message like relief is coming. You know, it's not always going to be this bad and this hard. We can have a good laugh and just get a little break, and we can cry in an hour. You know, sometimes when I laugh, I feel almost like I'm betraying Ollie's memory, because like, no, you can't laugh yet. You still have to be sad and grieve and mourn, because then you're keeping his memory alive. But Ollie was a little court jester, actually. He made me laugh all the time. He was such a character. He'd want me to laugh. You know, laughing doesn't mean I'm not grieving. So that's something I try to help clients with as well, is that you can have these extreme emotions, and that's okay, and it's healthy, and it's good for you. And a supervisor once said to me also, like, you're the FedEx lady. You're bringing the package, but you're not signing the package for the package, and you're not opening the package. You're just delivering the package. So when it comes to emotions and what I think clients should or shouldn't be doing, if they need a big laugh or a big cry, or they need to have a meltdown, I can only deliver the package. It's really up to them what they do with it.
What a great program, and it was great listening to Julie, who's one of my best friends and colleagues, and we laugh together more than we talk about business, and that's who Julie is. She's wonderful. It was great to hear you. It was a great program.